Hey, Beach Church. It's that time again for another tidbit from Liz. Um, and if you're watching this right now, maybe it's on your phone, maybe it's late at night, and maybe quietly. I guess I just want you all to know something, that I'm not talking at you today. I'm talking to you today. And I feel like that's a really good way to start and reframe that, because I was assigned to teach Exodus, right? Chapters 7 through 9. But to understand these chapters fully and faithfully, I think we need to zoom out and walk through all the other plagues. Because the plagues aren't ancient punishment stories. That's kind of like if you watched The Prince of Egypt when you were little, you probably saw it like, oh, God's punishing Pharaoh. But there is a whole lot more in that. And to understand the 7 through 9 chapter, you need to get that these are deeply human stories. And they describe what happens when things we lean on for identity, safety, or meaning in our life, they begin to fail. And if that feels close to home, then this teaching is for you. And identities could be in your role, your vocation, and kids grow up, you lose your job, and it fails. That's going to correlate to the plagues. And I'm going to try to get that in a context for you to understand it, because it's the way it hit me. So before we begin, right, I want to gently reframe something. God doesn't dismantle things to embarrass us. He dismantles things like identities and roles that we have to free us. Very often, what we feel like is a disruption in our life is actually God touching something that was never, ever meant to carry the weight of who we are. So if you feel like you've been a wife and now you're divorcing, or a mother and your kids are all grown up or moved away, or an executive, or whatever your identity was in your vocation, and then it's over, God wants to break that down and disrupt that in our lives. And he's actually trying to touch something in your heart that may have been an idol, a false god, to break it away so that you don't carry all of that. You find out who you were created to be. So here we go. Plague 1. In Egypt, the Nile, right? This river, everybody jokes about the Nile, the biggest river in Egypt. Water, food, economy, survival. So when the Nile turns to blood, right, God is saying, what you trusted to give you life, yeah, that cannot save you. And that's what the representation is of it. So let me ask you this gently and honestly. What have you built your life on that won't last? That eventually that role that all of your identity is on, or something heavy in your life you're carrying, that won't last. And when it ends, you feel isolated and alone. Not just what you do, but who you believe you are. Like who you believe you are. And if it were removed, if it were a role, or it's a title, or a responsibility, or an image, right? That's the Nile in our life. And when that thing is threatened, how quickly does fear rise up? If it's your company, if it's your livelihood, how quickly does fear come up in that identity? So that reaction tells us something important. So I want you to think on that. That's plague 1. Then plague 2, frogs. And frogs were sacred, right? Everybody understands that. Back in Egypt, they symbolized fertility and life and blessing. So God lets them multiply until Egypt can't rest. It was also a god of theirs, Hecate or Hapi. I can't remember which one's which, but I think Hecate. Maybe it's Hapi. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So ask yourself, right? What have I made idol in my life that is a role that was never supposed to be an identity that can get so out of hand that can multiply that I can't even rest in it. It could be you being a parent, a spouse, a provider, a caretaker, the boyfriend, the girlfriend, the strong one, the faithful one, the one who holds everything together in their family and holds it all in. Roles are good. They are. But when a role becomes an identity, it quietly becomes a false god. And you don't realize it. It's really sneaky. Being somebody's wife, you might put your husband up on a pedestal, or, your children, you break down all your time just to make their needs happen. So I really want you to look at that. Okay, look at that. Because something that was meant to be good can multiply so much so that you can't carry it like this. So here's the hard truth. And I want you to understand this gently. When we build our identity around these false gods, we often seek public validation through them. We look for praise, recognition, being needed, being seen as a sacrificial or strong human, right? For these people, whether it's your business or your family or whatever your role is. And then, as God would have it, when those identities collapse, when the child struggles, when the marriage shifts, when the career will falter and it's not going the way you thought it would, we often then publicly play the victim where we were just like the hero. So not because we're manipulative, but because collapse is terrifying and we've put everything into that role. And victimhood can feel safer than the transformation that God is trying to have happen. So ask yourself honestly, if you're in one of these shifts, under one of those plagues, have you ever looked for attention or validation around a role God never meant to define you, to be your sole identity? And when that role collapsed, maybe your kids grew out of it or moved away, or your career ended and you got a nice gold watch, or, you just stopped being so needed and then you felt so less wanted. Did you focus more on the pain, in being seen, than doing the hard work of actually changing that role into the right balance of what you should be? It's a good question. So then we'll move on to plague 3, plague of gnats. I can't stand them. But what you got to know here is a little nerdy nugget is like, this is where the magicians stop. Like they say, this is the finger of God and control no longer works. So magicians were like the intermediaries between God, like Pharaoh, who was the human god on earth, and then the ultimate alpha god. And they were like, nope, the gnats, plague 3, that's it. This is the finger of God. So it's like, if you notice in plague 1 and plague 2, there's a progression. So he keeps trying to pull them. First it's the river, right? And then it's the frogs. And he's multiplying something they think is great. He turns that false identity into something they can't handle anymore. And now, wow, it is horrible. Like gnats all over your body, all over your skin, all over your face, all over your food. And here it is again, God interrupting. That's the cycle. He's interrupting. And we build identity on a role. We seek validation through it. And then when it collapses, it publicly wounds us and covers our skin. And we return to the same identity just to avoid the deeper change, right? That God is inviting us in. And so grace and mercy, Moses is like, come on, dude. Look, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. And I really want you to see that the arrogance, all of these things are giving Pharaoh grace and mercy to shift and not be the God, to accept he's not, what he believes is the sun and the moon, and to relent that Yahweh, the God of Moses and the Hebrews, is the true God. But he's still third time here, won't relent. So then I kind of see that as when we build the role and we seek our validation, publicly through that identity, and then it collapses. It becomes publicly a wound. And we return to that same identity, right? And then we avoid the deeper change in God, and the cycle continues. So pause here and ask yourself, what friendships maybe have you neglected, or hobbies in your life, or things that you always wanted to get? Maybe it was to be more comfortable trying to be in the role than being who you were created to be. Like if you wanted to go back to school, but you were sacrificing so much to be X, Y, and Z. Think about that. God never intended for that imbalance, and it overtook them like the gnats. What development or study have you procrastinated on because it felt safer to stay useful than to grow into who God is calling you to be, and to face whoever it is that's needing you so much? To step out of that and say, hey, I'm not going to be able to do this much. I want to start doing this. This is my calling, and stepping out. Avoidance isn't laziness. It's fear of becoming something new. And when God is shifting something in your life, instead of seeing it as a collapse, try to open your eyes to whatever it is that he's removing, so that you really can become what he called you to be, right? So now we're going to go to 4 and 5. Livestock. Again, like the frog, the cow is also a big god in their land. And so livestock represented security and a future, right? Sound familiar? Security, future. So ask yourself, what part of your life feels unsafe if you're no longer needed in that role? If your husband passes away, are you still a wife? If your kids move away and grow up, are you still a mother? What part of your life feels unsafe? Are you a husband? Are you a father? Are you a CEO? If you retire and your company collapses, what are you going to do during the day? If people no longer see you the same way, God doesn't remove false security to punish us. He removes it so that we don't build our lives on something that can't hold us. Because you're not just a sister, brother, father, mother, pastor, preacher, CEO, executive. He's trying to remove it and show you you're so much more. And that's one small facet, not your role, not your identity. It's a piece of a part of your life, but not who he created you to be. So then plague 6, right? This is a rough one. Boils. So the priest can't stand at this point, right? And their performance, because they're trying to manifest the same sort of magic that Moses was performing, right? But the gnats and the pestilence and the frogs and everything else, yeah, they took a toll on his skin, and the priests have boils everywhere. So performance stops. And here's the quiet mercy that I see in that. God is not asking you to try harder. He's asking you to stop hiding. Stop hiding. You don't need to be that role just because you've played that role so long. It's time for you to come on out into the light. Who am I if I'm not impressive? Who am I if I'm not needed? Who am I if I stop performing? If I'm not making everybody happier, doing all these things for all these people? Who am I if I'm not keeping busy? For me, those questions feel terrifying and holy and more holy, because they purify you. They make you really look inward and be introspective. And that's a rough one, trust me. So plague 7 through 9, chaos, exhaustion, darkness, right? Chaos breaks through the control, strength runs out, darkness settles in. That's the gist of the Ra, god of the sun. The whole place is covered in darkness. So I'm going to ask you, what does that look like in your life? What feels like darkness when the identity is lost, or when you realized the identity that you thought you had was so strong and now it's being taken away? What feels quiet and empty and unclear, because the old version of you, it no longer fits. Darkness is not abandonment. It's often the place where false identities finally die so that your true identity can be born. I know a lot of people place this on their age, or they put it on empty nesting or retirement, but this could be when you're like 19 and you thought you were going to do this, but now you're in this, and maybe the career you thought was going to work out, somehow you got injured and it didn't come to pass. Or maybe the marriage you thought was perfect fell apart, and now you're in your mid-30s and you can't imagine what God could do with you. But maybe the dismantling of that very identity is God bringing you closer to Him and what He's called you to do. And that's not just a positive reframe, I promise you. So darkness is not abandonment. And it can be the place where the false identity finally dies so that your true identity can be born. Maybe you're a husband, but maybe this time you're more than that. Or a wife, you're more than that. Or a mother, you're more than that. So the final thought that I have here is the ending of it all. Pharaoh represents false ownership, right? He thinks he's God. So anything that says you're only valuable if, fill in the dot. You're only loved when, you're only safe as long as, they're only happy with me if I do all these little things for them. Well, God wants to confront that. Not to shame you, but to free you. Because that's like a false God. Who are you performing for? You should not be in slavery like the Egypts were with the Hebrews. It just shouldn't be that way. So, when you think about it, freedom requires change. And in that change, victimhood will avoid the change to keep you in that enslaved feeling. God loves you too much to let you stay in that darkness, to let you stay stuck in the loop that says you'll be single forever, or this is as good as it gets, or you're only good enough to these people for this reason. And when they fall away, where are you? Who are you? So with that, let me say this gently. God is not exposing your false gods because He wants to humiliate you or shame you. He's not pulling people away that are not supposed to be in your life. He's doing it because He sees who you could become. And if you submit your will to Him, which most of you I'm sure have, you understand that it's a process and you trust Him and love Him through it. God, He's the one that created you, right? So He knows what you are created for, and more than performing in a role that was never meant to define you. So that's the gist of it, 7 through 9. But I really wanted to cover all of those plagues in a different light so that you could actually apply them. Because whether it's the blood that hit the water in the Nile, really it's just saying, what is your life source? And if it's something that brought fertility to them, like frogs, that was their god. Not only did He attack each one of their gods in the plague, but what their gods represented, what we put our faith in. Like if you are trying to get pregnant and you can't, you have to have some level of life with God. Whether it's through modern medicine, whether it's through prayer and fasting, whatever it is. If it's, something else that you believe is going to grow in your life, maybe your income or your funds, that's a concept of fertility and growth and rebirth, right? But He's saying, don't put your faith in the money or the work or your income. It's the same idea. If you apply it to your life, He can make something like so abundant and it not be too much for you. The very thing He called you to do, He will bring you through to do, and you don't have to fear it. And you don't have to worry about being shamed or humiliated because you didn't get this job, or your marriage isn't working this way, or you're not living where you thought you would, or your kids aren't behaving the way they could. Whatever it is, you don't have to be ashamed. Let the Lord pull apart any false god that you might have put idle. even a spouse, because they will fail you. They're human. And you have to be able to look back at God and say, okay, Lord, what can you do with this? My faith and hope is in you. So whatever plagues your life, whatever false idols you might find that you have, I just pray that this message would encourage you and you will absolutely find grace and peace. I miss you all and love you. Mwah. Bye.